All right, can everyone see this?
Books don't appear because they are needed,
Yes.
and least of all because they are
Okay,
true.
let me see if I can start this from the beginning. Okay, welcome. We're doing volume one, the editor's introduction to the new translation, Ritter's, Karl Marx's Capital Volume One. And this is an experiment, and we're using an online text-to-speech converter that includes some artificial intelligence, although I think this is actually just the strictly text-to-speech, which is not that bad. This, I think. We'll see.
This venture, the capital venture, to construct the hidden whole of the capital system, was motivated in the first place by editor's introduction. Paul North. Marx's anger. Before I talk about Marx's method, it is important to understand what motivated him to undertake his immense study, which, once begun, coincided with the limits of his lifetime. Books don't appear because they are needed, and least of all because they are true. This venture, the capital venture, to construct the hidden whole of the capital system, was motivated in the first place by anger. This indignation birthed Marx's polemical spirit, the critical disposition, wrote Ludovico Silva in his book Marx's Literary Style. Isaiah Berlin in his intellectual portrait of Marx says at one point that the critical theorist lived in a cloud of anger and resentment. Marx's anger went through many phases, though, and it wasn't merely a personal issue as Berlin suggests. If some people are angry now because the pace of societal reform is too slow, because past crimes remain without justice, because too many of us and our friends get the short end of the economic stick, because too much of the world population lives precariously, moving in and out of the informal economy or caught between prison and a pine box, because the majority of the world lives at the mercy of climate downturns and despots. Personal anger seems unavoidable. It is also problematic, insofar as it is a subjective reception of an objective situation. The same was true for Marx, absolutely. He was a person with a psychology, a life history, rational and irrational attachments and repulsions toward people around him and the news of the day. And yet, although he never lost his ability to get personally furious at events and at people, his anger developed into something more, something you could call objective. What is objective anger? A state of the soul continuous with the state of the world. Proust's Gloria, with its call to be stoles, mutig, und ehrenvoll, proud, brave, and noble, and the sentiment in the revolutionary French song La Marseillaise, still sung in private gatherings, with its call liberté, liberté chérie, freedom, beloved freedom. At university in Bonn, Marx studied literature and wrote it as well. Later he transferred to the university in Berlin to study law, and there he encountered the younger version of freedom fighters, who were inspired by the philosophy of Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. He also discovered, as he wrote to his father in a letter in 1837, that there could be no headway without philosophy. Here started one of Marx's most tendentious relationships with Hegel and his method. Marx's first go-round with German idealist philosophy left him bewildered. For some days my vexation made me quite incapable of thinking. I ran about madly in the garden by the dirty water of the Spree. Hegel was the first statue Marx knocked off its pedestal, but by no means the last. He knocked Hegel off with the help of Hegel's critic, Ludwig Feuerbach, then knocked Feuerbach off with the help of a budding practical thinking akin to political economy. And then, famously, he knocked political economy off in his later work, in part with Hegel's help, though with an aspect of Hegel that did not conflict with Marx's basic anti-Hegelianism. It is true that Marx was often furious at particular people, unfairly perhaps, but no less truly, for not living up to a possibility he had once seen in them, friends, for instance, who became former friends after they hit their limitations. Their promise had been for him intellectual and political, not a matter of their individual personalities. Although their problematic personal commitments often spelled the limitations of their philosophical and political potentials. For instance, Marx came to ridicule his one-time friend Bruno Bauer for his unshakable commitment to Hegel and liberal politics, nicknaming him Saint Bruno because his head stayed in the clouds. Hallowed by pure criticism, Marx maintained a long and sometimes distasteful animosity toward a fellow socialist, Ferdinand Lassalle. Because Lassalle's own personal vanity got in the way of his societal work, and the animosity on Marx's part didn't even end when Lassalle died in a duel brought on by that vanity. I won't repeat the nicknames Marx invented for Lassalle in letters to Engels. Once Marx even wrote a faux obituary for a one-time collaborator, Moses Hess, who is still at least physically alive. No doubt Marx, especially early in his political and intellectual career, was a hothead, but even in these cases what irked him was others' failure to see the consequences of their own false allegiances, wrong decisions, and personal foibles for the larger struggle. Marx's anger was looking for the right object. Only then could it become objective. The process of finding the object took his mature lifetime and eventually took the shape of the capital venture with its multiple drafts and volumes. Something as vexing and huge as the capital system called for an equally vexing and long smolder. Once schooled, Marx's anger went from outrage at individuals and their bad politics and bad philosophy to a critique of a system and its mendacious representation by the science, political economy, that was supposed to understand it. Marx exploited the particular scandal that arose to develop his anti-Prussian ideas. The poor were committing forced malfeasance, argued the government, which had established new laws that prohibited the poor from gathering fallen timber in state forests, even though that wood had previously been free to them under gleaning rights and, moreover, the wood was crucial for fulfilling their basic needs. In a 5-part investigation between October and November 1842, Marx exercised the freedom of the press, that he believed at the time was key to bringing about other political freedoms. He excoriated the Prussian lawmakers and their new timber laws, along with the local enforcers. Most of his outrage, tuned to a boil, peppered with sarcasm and an occasional spray of fury, came out against the jurists' inconsistencies as well as at the right to property that these laws began to impute to aristocratic landholders. A right that was now supposed to supersede the right to subsist held by rural paupers who needed wood not only for fireplaces, but also for brooms, tools, fishing rods, fence posts, and other essential means of living. His pen grumbled against the aristocracy's shields and accomplices. This firm wooden foundation of your argument is so rotten that a single breath of sound common sense is sufficient to shatter it into 1,000 fragments. 6. He learned something about anger here. The other side was angry too, and raw anger against raw anger might be a zero-sum game. The anger of owners expressed itself through laws, in fact, but also, most directly, through the forest wardens, who stalked the wood gatherers and ultimately denounced them in court. The warden, furthermore, is a denouncer. The charge he draws up is a denunciation. The value of the object, therefore, becomes the subject matter of the denunciation. The warden loses his dignity as a judge, and the function of judge is most profoundly debased, because at that moment it is indistinguishable from the function of denouncer. 7. The true object. The subsistence of the poor is too important to become fodder for denunciation. Further, if you denounce the denouncer, you become one of them and similarly debase the true object. To produce a free society, even in the liberal sense of free individuals permitted to conduct business without interference by the state, it is not enough to badmouth an illiberal regime as if it has broken a higher moral law. Marx learned a lesson about moralizing. It is the instrument of the other side. Denouncing, along with its counterparts, blaming, vilifying, rebuking, accusing, makes the object a matter of dispute, or worse, of conviction. But the requirements for life are indisputable. They are not convictions but truths. Wood is not good or bad, mine or yours, because of law. The laws in law itself are not bad or good, therefore, because someone implements them for their own interest. Before anything else, a thing is for me or you to use according to need. Need, Marx discovered in a visceral way through these arguments, is higher than law. And so, a different mode of anger was necessary to free the state of laws that do not recognize, above all, citizens' needs. Anger had to turn into the coldest, most ruthlessly thorough analysis of the system of needs. In the articles on wood theft, Marx quietens his rage but doesn't soften it. He lets go of a personal aspect and channels his energies into an activity he likes to call, following a widespread practice of his day and milieu, critique. When, in 1862, his immense study started to be called Das Kapital, Capital, Marx had already for several years been referring to it as a critique of political economy. In the final version, final because of Marx's death, though not conclusive in several dimensions, this phrase became the book's subtitle. Marx's anger had gone through distinct phases. He took the Rhenish parliament down several pegs. Over decades, his hatred had several targets, in turn the Prussian government, the Philistines, the reformers, the philosophers, Hegel, Hegel's followers, liberals, and most other socialists. Finally, he settled on a grand target, or rather two. Political economy represented not only the obstacle, but also the root to the second object of his magnificent outrage, the capital system. Together with Engels, who was perhaps the only person never to become the butt of his ire, Marx developed his sense of what true criticism was by attacking those who claimed to be doing it already. He ridiculed their insistence on critical criticism by ironically adding one more critique to it, writing with Engels the Holy Family, or critique of critical criticism, against a loose group later known as the Young Hegelians, which included Bruno Bauer, Arnold Ruge, and Moses Hess, which counted among its progenitors Ludwig Feuerbach and David Strauss. In those circles everything was so critical that the word lost its force. Speaking generally, Young Hegelians critiqued the Prussian state and Germanic society for not making Hegel's categories into political realities, and Marx critiqued the Young Hegelians for being uncritical about their thought master, Hegel, and his rationalism, founding the kingdom of the idea, as Feuerbach wrote to Hegel, in the conviction that history unfolded rationally toward the perfect state, in their commitment to civil society as the protector of right, and in their belief that philosophy and history had come to their fruition and end in Hegel's system. More than at the Hegelians personally, Marx aimed his first sustained attack at their flimsy edifice of theory that he was already convinced would lead neither to liberal democracy nor to the socialism he increasingly saw as the only route to human freedom. The years of critique of so-called critical critique culminated in Marx's meticulous commentary on Hegel's lectures on civil society, which the latter had published in 1820 as Elements of the Philosophy of Right and which had become a Bible for his followers. Marx's attack on Hegel's social thought was never finished or published, although its introduction came out in 1844 in the Deutsche Französische Jahrbuch that Marx was editing in Parisian exile. In the published introduction to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, anger becomes prose, becomes principle, form, style, and enduring attack. How do you attack Hegelianism? You produce sentences that rival the masters and last as long or longer in critical consciousness. A famous sentence from the tract runs, "The weapon of criticism cannot, of course, replace criticism by weapons. Material force must be overthrown by material force. But theory also becomes a material force as soon as it has gripped the masses." This is a good motto for the new shape of Marx's anger: theory become material force. Critique as a weapon that grips the masses. At that moment the object of Marx's critique was philosophy, which, he argued, did theory for theory's own sake. Or worse, it didn't know that theory on its own reinforced the German bourgeoisie and its moral self-confidence. Critique did not mean, for Marx then, merely correcting a theory in order to make a better theory, any more than the one doing critique would be a bourgeois philosopher, comfortable with the weak political idea that theoretical maxims can be rules for action. Anger can be intense, it can have different styles and intentions, it comes and goes. But in addition to having a target, it always also has a Vorhaben. In the 1840s, Marx found a Vorhaben that changed the style, intensity, and scope of his anger, the masses. He called it in the introduction to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right. It grew somewhat less intense in order to grow much broader. It took in all of human history, including the future, and the whole planet. It became a magnificent anger. It wasn't monolithic but shifted styles from outrage and personal attack to sarcasm as a way of investigating the weaknesses of present methods, all embedded in the search for an analytic method that could lay bare the truths covered up or avoided by all those who had provoked his personal ire. Exasperation at capitalists and their sometimes stooges, political economists, becomes a conviction that the system is in fact impersonal, making everyone its stooge. As much capitalists as they are apologists. Indignation at the state of understanding becomes revelation of a system that otherwise hides. Intense anger becomes dogged persistence on the project, despite the passage of years, personal suffering and poverty, repeated failure of revolutionary attempts across Europe, large economic crises. And, in his most intimate thoughts, a nagging sense that still, even after publishing Volume 1, even after writing thousands of pages of drafts, he had not found the answers he had sought or, for that matter, the form to put them in. Capital and Capital. Capital is the title of a book in the name of a thing. The thing has many peculiarities, and that is no less true of Marx's book. The book is the mature outgrowth of his objective anger, aimed at the system that was taking over the world and the science that purported to study it, political economy. The thing called capital is full to the top with peculiarities, and Marx never stopped wondering at them. By means of capital, radically different entities transform into one another. A raw material turns into a finished product in production. One good becomes another good altogether through exchange. Products become money through sales. Activities become industries through incorporation and consolidation, and people with some money to seed their business become rich beyond what they started out with. Capital magically produces what never existed, or so it appears. It seems to hold a secret power that takes standing stock and makes out of it what was not already in it. Against all reason, out of the same capital makes more. The peculiar thing called capital has a long history, and many of the elements that make up the system we know, where capital is king, existed for a long time before it. You can find elements of it in ancient worlds, and also throughout early modernity. Elements like an independent money form, surplus goods and surplus labor, a stark division between owners and laborers, a drive to accumulate, and distribution of goods through a market. None of these is exactly new, and yet none of them stays exactly the same, either, when they come together in the way Marx recognized as startlingly new in the capital system, whose full-fledged, world-ordering form is at most 5 centuries old. The name capital whispers head. In the Middle Ages, the Low Latin or substantive adjective capitalis, of the head, came to refer to property, in part because property is the system's top.
Its crown, its brain, and leading part. English cognate of capitalize, capital, was only one possible way to refer to stuff like property in early modernity. There were other words like chattel, wealth, and assets, each of which referred in different ways to goods you could possess. But capital took the lead and came to designate a thing that was more than just property. You could do things with it, such as gain more property. Things in Federici's word and later in Smith's word that still vibrate when we say it. Capital is a special kind of property that becomes world sovereign by getting out ahead and opening the world to those who want to take possession of some part of it. To dominate a subset of its people or lands, and to return home with more wealth than they went off with. In the book called Capital, Marx takes the special powers attributed to capital and brings them back to earth, attempting to rid it of its mysteries. In order to demystify capital, the book had to be extremely precise, but also complex, not to mention long. Volume 1 is only the first of what Marx early on projected would fill 6 independent books, although later he decided that, in an altered shape and with some altered contents, it would take up only 4 books. Point 13. What we call Volume 1 does not stand on its own without the other books. They expand the picture of capital with essential analyses of circulation in Volume 2 and the different kinds of profit in Volume 3. Volume 4 was not written. Because of the way Marx wrote the books you should think of Volume 1 as a small part of a rangy project or venture always on the way to formulation. The material spreads across the few published works. Like this volume and a somewhat different and much shorter predecessor from 1859 called An English Contribution to the Critique of Political Economy, and a myriad of unpublished manuscripts, as well as notebooks filled with transcribed excerpts from sources plus Marx's commentaries on those sources, alongside several distinct projected plans for the finished work or works. Marx reimagined the project several times. And so, for one thing, Capital is peculiar because there is no single finished version of the whole. That is, it is peculiar because it is incomplete. On one hand, it is incomplete because it is unfinished, on the other hand, it is incomplete because the project is essentially incomplete. The method was constantly under construction and the object of study kept eluding him. Changing as he learned more about it and changing because one of capital's chief characteristics identified by Marx is to be in constant, savage change in multiple dimensions all the time. No book could completely capture its complexities and its shifting modes and practices. Nonetheless, Marx tries to capture it in all its complexity and change. In the afterword to the second edition, Marx famously divided his attempt, which we can call the capital venture, into 2 pursuits. To analyze the system, he had to find the right mode of investigation. And that would then subsequently require the right mode of presentation. The investigation had to appropriate the material in detail, analyze its various forms of development, and trace their interconnection. Successful appropriation, analysis, and tracing interconnections precedes, or so he asserts, shaping the material for readers. And then, only once this work has been done can the real movement be presented in a suitable way. With the words real movement, Marx hints at the special property of capital as he sees it. Capital is labor power set in motion. 14. The suggestion is that the moving object requires a special, moving presentation. One challenge to both the method of investigation and the mode of presentation is that capital's motion is double, at least double. Capital causes things to move, such as laborers and raw materials, while the capital system itself moves in its own eccentric ways. Capital flows out, returns, cycles, increases and decreases, and bridges all sorts of gaps and expanses of time and space, which it also creates. At the same time, capital as a whole system grows and expands, unevenly, but so the theory goes constantly. You can see why Marx was unsure how to trace its wild courses. Where would he find a conceptual vocabulary for the restless phenomena of the capital system? What kind of writing would he invent in order to capture them? For the investigation to succeed, even before he found the right mode of presentation, he needed to find a set of categories that would describe a polydimensional, interconnected, vast, and of course moving system. Venture comes from the categories Marx felt he had to derive from all sorts of disparate sources in order to appropriate the material that was so complex and in motion in so many ways: buyers and sellers, producers and owners and banks, commodities and money, and so on. He raked words and thoughts out of sources as disparate as philosophy, modern and ancient, political economy, literature, government reports, journalism, jurisprudence, histories, and political speeches, and on top of that he invented some concepts outright. Once he had gathered and adjusted a set of categories that could break the moving system into the right parts without abrogating their flux, then he could turn his attention to finding the best way to teach readers about the parts and their interconnections, motions, and consequences in human lives. More than half a lifetime was not enough for Marx to complete the investigation and devise a good way to present it. He adopted the basic picture of an economy from Adam Smith and David Ricardo and their followers, and then he radically rewrote their accounts to adapt them to his vision of the whole, which differed in important ways from theirs. Value, he learned from Smith and Ricardo, has a relationship to the exchangeability of goods as well as to the labor needed to produce them. Value has two sides. He also learned that the division of labor had shifted and deepened and multiplied and became ever more intractable under capital, and that intractable labor divisions had produced a society divided into distinct classes that are hard to budge because of their opposing interests. He learned that the price of a commodity is not determined exclusively by supply and demand but varies around a natural price determined by the cost of production. 15. He learned that there are different forms of revenue, namely profit, rent, and interest. He learned that this economic and social mode, which he never called capitalism but has come to be called that, goes through phases. Under certain conditions of productivity, the system can be in an advancing, stationary, or declining condition, in Smith's words. 16. And then in Marx's earliest full draft of the Capital Project, written between 1857 and 1858. He presents an extended critique of the figures he calls D. Ricardo and A. Smith, along with their followers and late readers. Marx comes to critique Smith and Ricardo and other political economists, in order that he can use important categories developed by them without some of the presuppositions and implications those categories had in their original contexts. Economists love to call each other names, and Marx is no exception. When he claims to critique political economy, however, he cannot separate himself completely from those he wants to critique. Marx is and is not a classical political economist. But he is not one in a different way than he is not what is called today a neoclassical economist or a Keynesian, sometimes called the heterodox position. Marx is much closer to Smith and Ricardo than he is to Alfred Marshall, John Maynard Keynes, and Milton Friedman. For this reason, as well as for the changes he wrought on economics as a whole, American and global readers today may not recognize the economy in what Marx calls political economy. Without a state or with a very atrophied one, without an obvious place for political negotiation about the best form of co-living, and without the social institutions that are obviously present and, even if not theoretically desirable, are certainly well used. If the system, described like this, is not working for you, this can be ascribed under neoclassical economic thought to imperfect implementation or to your imperfect understanding of the economy. Either some erroneous restriction has entered the market or you are an unsuccessful version of a market actor. A hallmark of neoclassical belief is that the system is perfect. Early thinkers in the field, English economist and logician W. S. Jevons for example, stated explicitly that economics should be modeled on physics. On a physics that never actually existed, moreover a science that describes our universe as a system naturally maintaining mechanical equilibrium, whose features are completely determined and so perfectly explainable. What neoclassical economics does not explain well are the imperfections, and further, the constitutional flaws which we can name, with Marx, extraction, extortion, exploitation, and expropriation that hide behind its idealizations. Although full of apparent peculiarities, Volume 1 of Capital is still the best place to begin if you want to understand the societal and economic system in which most of the world now lives. Observers in the mid-19th century, not only economic thinkers, not even only scholars, but politicians as well as citizens, including especially laborers, recognized that life had changed dramatically in Europe and also around the planet. Changes had been happening for a long time. It wasn't that 1750 rolled around or 1800, and overnight as one unit the mass of hand workers became machine operators and independent subsistence farmers scurried off their land, pushed out by agro-capitalists. For centuries Europeans and people under their colonial rule had been moving away from other societal systems, sometimes called feudal, toward one organized around the production of capital. Around the planet people are still making this move for the first time. What happened between the late 18th and the middle of the 19th century was that theories about these relocations began to be written in Europe and its satellites. Marx discovered, but also decided, over the period between receiving his doctorate in philosophy in 1841 and the failure of the anti-monarchical revolutionary wave that crossed Europe in 1848, that he would dedicate his life 8-10 hours a day in the library or at his desk, with especially great intensity for about 20 years. Not unlike a laborer in the capital system to composing as full a picture of the system as such a system demanded, because it was a system that tended toward fullness. A monstrous behemoth was coming over the horizon. Smith and Ricardo saw the hairs on its great back. Marx's friend Engels sifted through its guts in the English factory owned by his father in 1844 and charted the abysmal conditions for workers there. And Marx made it his task, over decades, to construct the rest of the monster from the clues he and others could spy. One peculiarity of the capital system is the vast interconnectivity among its parts. Another is the absolute necessity with which they must work together, and yet another is the local arbitrariness of actions. A single business or a group of workers could collapse or be driven out of work, none the worse for the system. On the other hand, every worker is connected to every other worker, each business to every other business, each sector of the economy to every other, through a reaction chain that can't be broken in any major way without disrupting the function of the whole. The general structure exists with extreme necessity, while the specific, concrete instances in which it operates are contingent and fungible. Prices, wages, supplies, demands, living standards, working conditions, and technological advancement, all of these rise and fall, depend on each other, and each varies in proportion to the others. Higher wages somewhere can bring wages up elsewhere, not to mention bringing profits down. Scarcity of raw materials in one place can bring production crashing down in another place. The monster is both too big to change easily and incredibly sensitive, a homeostatic system that adjusts itself through negative feedback, to borrow a metaphor from biology. Describing the system, filling in the blanks in what we know and can know about it, Marx in fact borrowed metaphors all the time, not to mention methods, from biology and chemistry, as well as from political economy and philosophy. The science to study this system would need to be as eclectic, complexly articulated, and absorptive as the behemoth that was swallowing everything. The method used in Capital has been poorly understood, Marx wrote in the postface to the second edition of Volume 1.18. Capital's method is certainly peculiar, and for good reason. The object of study is too big and too hidden to treat in an obvious way, the relationships between the parts are too complex, in many cases illogical according to customary logics. And many misunderstandings stand between us and the reality of things, misunderstandings pervaded by the system itself. Fundamentally new elements. Volume 1 is full of difficult technical issues. Some are difficult because they refer to a philosophical tradition not everyone is familiar with. Some are difficult because they take problematics from political economy and develop them in new ways. And some are difficult for the sheer degree of complexity, when all the processes that come together in them are combined into a whole picture. One basic fact stands, it is the stock and stem of the project, the object of Marx's objective anger, an outrageous fact that exists alongside every technical discussion in the book. The basic, outrageous fact is that workers are complicit in a system that does not benefit them, and everyone is complicit in a system that benefits no one in the long run. Most obviously, the system doesn't benefit workers since it extorts and exploits their powers and keeps them always at the lower end of societal wealth. Today it is excruciatingly obvious, although it was to Marx too, that it doesn't benefit the earth. Since the system recklessly extracts raw materials and gives back putrid waste and toxic pollution. 19 It is also true that it doesn't benefit capitalists in the long run because it destroys the Earth's surface, because it makes them into extorters and exploiters, and, moreover, because it simultaneously leaves them liable to failure, crises, and at the outside, popular revolution. Saying no to false pictures of it. What Marx calls vulgar or bourgeois economics, an offshoot of classical political economy, was, he found, not merely wrong about a few important things. It was often an exact negation of the facts, and so, if you read it emblematically, vulgar economics pointed negatively but directly at the reality of things. Adjusting the accounts of the political economists achieves the goal. It leads you to aspects of the capital system as it really is. XXI yet while bragging about their special critical depth. The political economists find that use value belongs to things independently of their properties as things, whereas their value belongs to them as things. With the value of things. It's the other way around, value is realized only in exchange, that is, a social process. XXII. They are not liars, the political economists, but they start out from wrong premises. And this is not purely their failing or the failing of their science. The capital system is partly responsible for generating the false premises that the political economists adopt. The system puts up images that conceal its inner workings. The book starts from one of these images. The commodity, which appears as a thing like any other thing yet commands behavior that no other kind of thing commands. Marx decided all the way back in 1858, at the very end of the long draft version now known as the Grundriss, that he needed to put the commodity first in his analysis. This section to be brought forward. The first category in which bourgeois wealth presents itself is that of the commodity XXIII. In the published versions of Volume 1, Marx does treat the commodity at the very beginning of chapter 1. But notice he says it is the first category in which capital appears, which is somewhat misleading. The commodity is not the generative core of the system. It is part of the display window for capital's self-presentation, behind which you find a back room, its inner workings. Everyone, workers and owners alike, is most familiar with commodities because we are all first and foremost consumers. We interact constantly with these exchangeable things, our lives depend on them. Unlike the theory of things propounded by Hegel and his followers, where things are inert, will-less lumps completely at the disposal of human beings who take possession of them and alienate them at will. XXIV Marx shows in the first few chapters that commodities are complex, not merely things whose thingly souls are animated by the system, which invests them with a will of their own that, no matter how illusory, is just as real as anything else. Under capital, things make us do things for them. Refusing Hegel's theory of things leads directly to an analysis of the metamorphosis that mere things undergo in the capital system. A commodity is never merely material in the sense that it is made out of matter. Like Hegel, in fact, Marx is not a materialist in the ancient sense or the natural scientific sense that believes everything, including life and ideas, is reducible to physical matter. Even if a commodity is made from physical matter, its material being is subsumed completely into its societal being. Matter serves societal ends, and it is this social sense of materialism that becomes Marx's credo. Unlike Hegel, Marx knows that this is not an effect of spirit or an idea, but an effect of the capital system, in which things take on an alien character. A commodity, whether a physical material thing or not, has a societal function. A hammer, for example, has a physical body, but its spirit is social. Considered from an everyday perspective, it is a hammer because it is heavy. From Marx's perspective, the hammer is heavy because society needs nails banged in. Heaviness is the quality wanted from a hammer because of the use our society has for it. Under the governance of capital, the need changes from a direct need to do something with a hammer to an indirect need for a hammer to be exchangeable for all other commodities. No matter how wildly unrelated to the hammer those other things might be. A hammer becomes an inert object with a very different societal use under capital. It becomes a bearer of value, and at the same time exchangeable things. Aristotle wrote that when two different qualities pertain to the same thing in the same respect at the same time, there is a contradiction. The things of capital are, strictly speaking, contradictory. That is also to say that the system's main operation is doubling. Everything is this and that at the same time, and separating the doubles is what Marx often means by his method of analysis. If you analyze it, a commodity, for instance, has a substrate, physical or not, and the substrate acts as a bearer of value. A hammer is heavy and it is also valuable. These are two very different kinds of traits. A hammer is two very different kinds of thing at the same time. And commodities are not the only elements of the system that double up. Value itself doubles. In the first step of the analysis, we learn there are two sides to a thing's value, value for use and value for exchange. Political economy was not wrong, it was partial. It stuck with the first appearance of things and didn't move on to the second. It didn't see the special doubleness of things under capital, whose first appearances look like this: commodities are simple things for use, wages are equivalent to the amount of work worked. Rent, profit, and interest are the most basic economic forms and innocently gained. Labor is a power expended by one and rented by another. Now, these appearances are real. The system couldn't go on without them, just as you can't get on in the world without your appearance to others, no matter how much your feelings may differ from it. Your psychology, how you actually feel in societal situations, needs the outward face in order to pursue your wants in a world of conflicting wants. The opposite is just as true. the outward face is a distorted expression of the inner workings and serves their purposes. What political economy found when it looked at the capital system was not truth, it was its necessary public face. This is in part why the innovations in Marx's book were not immediately recognized by readers. The first edition came out to near silence, and Marx complained to Engels about one of the few reviewers. It is strange that the fellow does not sense the three fundamentally new elements of the book. According to Marx, to revise political economy and to go beyond it in significant ways. The three new elements he added demonstrated that in contrast to all former political economy, which from the very outset treats the particular fragments of surplus value with their fixed forms of rent, profit, and interest as already given, I first deal with the general form of surplus value, in which all these fragments are still undifferentiated in solution, as it were. That the economists, without exception, have missed the simple point that if the commodity has a double character, use value and exchange value, then the labor represented by the commodity must also have a twofold character. While the bare analysis of labor without more, as in Smith, Ricardo, etc., is bound to come up everywhere against the inexplicable. This is, in fact, the whole secret of the critical conception. That for the first time wages are shown to be the irrational form in which a relation hidden behind them appears. And that this is exactly represented in the two forms of wages: time wages and piece wages. XXV. You can see that the book's three fundamentally new elements were already there, hidden within existing economic discourse. Marx brings to light what the economists don't or can't see within their own discourse. 1. Within the three accepted modes of profit, there lies a single more general phenomenon: surplus value. 2. Next to political economy's theory of the commodity there sits the whole secret of the critical conception. 3. Behind workers' wages there lies a previously unknown relationship between owners and workers, which Marx comes to call the capital relation. I sell a hammer, I make a profit. It seems simple. But profit is not the most basic category for these phenomena. It is, rather, a version of something else. It points toward a thing held in common by the three modes of money-making. Marx calls this surplus value, developing a category that Ricardo and others had established before him.
Okay, thus endeth our procedures looking at the first part of Paul North's preface to Karl Marx's Capital Volume 1, the new translation, and I found it quite useful. I know probably some others didn't quite get that. You can also notice several things. Let me just finish this sort of annotation about this. We've gotten probably 2/3 of the way through it. There's a 50,000 character limit, but unfortunately there's the limit is reached earlier with a more normal natural speech version assisted by some AI. You can see when it shifted, if you've been listening from the beginning, that it reverted back to a more normal text-to-speech translation. You'll also note that it's interesting how compared to the one we were listening to yesterday, when it went from one word to another without any, looking out for phrases or syntax, that this one was slightly smoother than the one yesterday, which read simply by every, lexical item. That is, every word. It read it separately, comparing it against, a corpus and blah, 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 all that linguistic stuff. And you could see the difference between the artificial language one, more artificial language one. It wasn't the premium version, but a more introductory version that we started with. That it was the original version that we started this whole thing with was a little smoother, slightly smoother. It still read the phrases, but it smoothed out the connections among the phrases. It still wasn't perfect, whatever that means. In the premium version, it read whole sentences and then did the phrases within the context of the whole sentence. So at this little annotation moment, and I will simply ask the question, and I have to look this up for myself, but I wonder, and it's a question I would ask Noam Chomsky. He's still alive at this point of recording. How has text-to-speech software, particularly with its AI ability to speed up processing, how much has it achieved what you originally wanted to do with transformational grammar? And I'm sure somebody's already asked the damn question. This is not a original thought, but I would, from an original thought point of view, I really would like to hear what Chomsky has said about this. And I'm sure he said it somewhere, somehow, because this isn't the first thought that comes to anyone's little uh, primitive brain. So with that, I will open this up to comments or questions as we're doing a live stream of this, and we're at 6 o'clock, and so I will, be ending this. If let me see if there are any pressing questions. Pressing questions? Brickbats? Interventions? I note from Anna's comments that the pronunciation deteriorated. And also footnotes weren't properly identified, so those would have to be bracketed. You could see how bracketing allowed you to not include that in the text-to-speech conversion. So there are lots of interesting things about this that you can see just in the thing you're looking at right now in the object of analysis. Not that I'm going to try and make everyone into a linguist, but or a linguistic scholar, but there's just a lot of good things in here. There's things that, aside from at a semantic level, my thinking about how I could have redone all my lectures, a decade's full of lectures, uh, by using this kind of observation about Marxist text in terms of doing an introductory course. But and the reality is, of course, I don't want to redo the introductory course. I have other things I want to do. But I suppose that if I did write an introductory course, which would be an amusing thing to waste my time for literally a semester, I would do it that way. And there's just stuff here that's just so good that is that the new interpretation, or at least North's interpretation here, gave me a whole bunch of ideas about how I could, redo the history of graphic design course I taught. Just you could redo the basic history of design course that I taught. It has all that stuff there. It's all there, and it was always there. And it's not like I haven't thought about it for decades, but it just seems to me this was a better way. Oh, I can do it that way, and it would just open up all kinds of other little things I could do. But that's assuming that you have a goal of simply teaching the introductory or the foundational courses, and more about the other things I want to do with the curriculum. So that's kind of my last little observation on that. Any other questions before I shut the live stream off? Somebody did make a comment. Nobody has. Somebody's ironing, but has no pressing questions. All righty now. I'm going to stop the share so that we can swear. All right. Well, it was effing good experiment at the front end. If you listen from the beginning, you could tell the differences in the type of software available. My problem, of course, is that I don't want to kowtow to the subscription service that does it in a nice, clean way. And of course, I'm irritated that the software that comes with the original publisher software is a very vanilla, as they would say, text-to-speech conversion that, as we heard yesterday, you read word by word almost. This, at least in its text-to-speech version, is slightly better because it does look at phrases, whereas the publishers, Princeton's software that they chose is because it was, designed for profit or whatever, it doesn't, sort of accelerate up into those things. But you'd think, I mean, it's Princeton after all, they should spring for something a little bit better. But needless to say, I think they have a contractual obligation to this particular software. software group, which should, from a profit point of view, actually ratchet up what it's doing and partner with a AI-based speech to text system, because I think a lot of people would enjoy that. And particularly since Princeton does produce expensive books, that particular amount of surplus value should be redistributed just to apply the same analysis. All righty, I'm at the end of my 6 o'clock obligations. My 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock obligations. I'm going to put in the related links, and we ended the live stream. So, you know, say whatever the frack you want.
Yeah. Thank you.
And let me just, while you're formulating your whatever you're going to say, let me just say that I may try and finish just to finish up the little experiment. There's nothing worse than not finishing an experiment. The remainder of the Paul North translation introduction, because I think it's fundamental, and we haven't looked at writers' notes at the front end notes, because both of these are important, because they are the current question of interpretation, which I have just mentioned, is actually really interesting. It's just a way of talking about it that obviously comes from having to teach the text, having taught the text for decades, both of the guys, the editors. They're just ideas that came to them from a metaphorical point of view, which I'm sure they've used in lectures. And I think about, oh, yeah, I could teach it that way. That would be a really good way to move from one thing to another thing, to bring in another thing. And that would be very cool. And I think that students would learn from that, you know, that would be a good thing. And if you concretized it into an introductory text, a series of lectures or notes, it would be all, yeah, that could just do a whole thing. But anyway, that's just thinking as a teacher. Now, thinking as a scholar, these are good ideas, and I think they have theoretical implications, but you have to make several, for what I want to do is several analytic steps. But, you know, whatever, that's good. It won't turn up in a lecture anytime soon, but this is important, you know, kind of positioning. And of course, speaking in a multidimensional way, it does allow me to talk a little bit more. If I were doing a memoir or an autobiography, I know, oh, okay, in that moment in my life, that's what I was thinking about. And yes, that makes perfect sense relative to the things I was working on. And it relates to other decisions that, life experience decisions that I made. And all those are projections, but good projections, whether it's Lacanian or not, or whatever. These are useful ideas, and I think revelatory, existential, and ontological, and all that other good shit. So the remainder of the experiment will be probably a second version of this tomorrow. If I can figure out and find a software that gives more natural AI, not at cost or not at demanding subscription or whatever, or I may just cough up and, you know, pay the money. You know, these are, I may try and do this tomorrow at least, probably not to extend it past Wednesday, but that's just a sense that I have of this, or else I could get lazy and figure out some other thing and at least finish off the writer preface introduction on Wednesday and begin that, because it might take several, you know, iterations. Because the way I proceeded in this case was to take the Google sample. I copied the Google sample and put it into the Easy Reader or whatever it is called, software, Natural Reader software. And it was reading from the Natural Reader software. But fortunately, since I could grab tons of text from Google in terms of the copying function, can't do that in the Princeton. Princeton, you can't copy it. You can only copy images of text. So it's just irritating, but for all kinds of reasons. Although I'm sure there's some option that I can figure out, and it's going to take a while. And I think there's that option in the non-proprietary version of the file, and blah blah blah. And herein lies 5 minutes of computer jargon. So anyway, that's kind of my plan for this week. If by Thursday I get totally lazy, we might go to the City of Quartz audio, and just because that's it's there, and we can have it do another 30 minutes of that, which is soothing, if nothing else. And I find it soothing because it is sort of a Marxian analysis of the regional history of Los Angeles, which is always interesting to me since I was imprisoned there for 10 years. So, all righty. Now I will stop talking. Please, at the top of the hour, writer's workshop. So, if I'm going to intervene at all, it will only be for 46 minutes.
Thank you. So we have 45 minutes. Okay.
Did anyone hear the segment on NPR this morning about socialism?
No.
Yeah.
The evils of socialism?
Socialism on NPR. Oh my God.
Yes, that's what I said.
Wow.
Well, that's
Nope.
what the right.
I haven't. I used to listen to NPR like addictively, and I barely listen to it anymore.
Well, this
Yes.
was on Brian Lair's show.
Oh, on the
and it was
Brian Lair
basically,
show. Yeah. Okay.
So it was basically there's a new article out that talks about the first person to say the word socialism. Apparently, it was Robert Owen.
Oh.
So
Well, he believed in a kind of socialism.
he
Let's put it
believed in
that way.
a kind of socialism, but apparently he made all sorts of money. In Wales, I guess it was. Was he? But then he was also Scottish, I want to say, or something like that.
Scottish.
Brian Lara is on WNYC, so he's on a local station. He's not
Oh
National.
yeah, that's
on
true.
on NPR per se. The local station is a member station that gets
All right.
Right.
feeds for national programming from
However,
NPR.
if you are a fan of WNYC, you can download the app and listen to it anywhere that way. But you do have to
That's
download
true.
the app.
Yeah. But apparently
Right.
he came to
So
America.
yeah, give us a
came to
recap.
America in 1820, I guess it was, and he addressed both House and Senate. Also went up to Boston, met with John Adams, who was too sick to travel, and went down to Monticello and met with Jefferson, who was too sick to, and was well received
Oh,
on all fronts.
that's crazy.
Yes, that's nuts. Just
Nuts.
craziness.
Crazy talk. Letting a socialist actually first of all, letting a socialist inside the Capitol. Well, there was no Capitol back then. Inside, where did he speak?
Who was
In
the
Philly?
socialist that they were talking about?
Robert Owens.
Okay.
I always thought that Marx had met Owens, but apparently Owens died in 1840, and that was only when Marx was 22 at the time.
They had socialism on NPR and fascism at Madison Square Gardens.
Right.
Yeah.
Ken Burns was just talking about it with Eddie Glaude and Nicole Wallace. So yeah, they're really hyping this new Da Vinci thing that he's got coming out in a couple weeks.
Oh, wait. Ken Burns is doing a Da Vinci documentary.
Yeah, he's got his next
Oops.
he did a project with his son-in-law and his daughter. Um, yeah.
Oh,
So
right, because his
this
daughter's
is
also
the
a producer.
right, but this is apparently the first non-American
Yeah, it's true.
subject that he's done.
Yeah,
It's
I
quite
was
interesting.
I was gonna say that is yeah. I haven't heard him do anything like not American.
Like they even showed a video segment from of him when did the Brooklyn Bridge documentary. That was his first. Was doing
Oh,
a
right,
series about the Brooklyn Bridge.
that
So
was before Civil War, right?
yeah, but yeah, it's really he's an interesting guy. He's quite old, but
Is he?
Noam is gonna be 96 this December the 7th. So
Wow.
yeah, wow is right.
Ooh. Yeah, it's still nothing compared to Jimmy Carter, who's over 100.
This is true.
And voted for probably the last. I assume that will be his last presidential election that he'll be voting in, but you never know.
You never know. Guys, figure out what
The age of
my
104.
picture is of.
It looks like some kind of a fox with special digital colors.
It's a Firefox. They're ultra rare.
Oh, that's the actual Firefox.
That's
So
the
they really are
actual
that
that's the
color.
actual Firefox. They
So
actually
that's
exist.
not, it's
That's
not
not enhanced.
manipulated.
No, it's not manipulated.
Yeah, because when I click on it, I can't download it. So it's got to be a
How do
real
we know
Firefox.
that it's for real?
Because I downloaded it and I checked it out.
Deep fake Firefox.
Deep
Deep
fake
fake
Firefox. Yes,
Firefox.
there we go. So now we know where they got the idea for the name of the browser.
I see.
Yes. So
There was books about that was Firefox all about uh like do it yourself kind of sustainable practices. You know those
right.
books?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So maybe that would have come first because those are like from the 60s at least.
Oh, is that? I think that's where they got the idea for the name
But
of the browser.
speaking of old people, Benjamin Netanyahu's father lived to be 102.
Oh God, I hope he doesn't live that long. That would be terrible.
That would be bad.
Yeah.
I actually got into a really good conversation with a this student who I took up to Columbia Business
Actually,
School today. So it's very interesting.
I do hope Benjamin Netanyahu lives that long because I want him to have a nice long sentence. But yes, we had a good old Nazi rally here in New York. It was pretty impressive.
Did
Yes.
you hear the so-called comedians,
Yes, I've heard
whatever that
clips from
was?
them. I've been hearing clips all day on various between the Majority Report and whatchamacallit, uh, Midas Touch.
Well, Kyle Kalinske played a long section of it. It was really horrifying what that guy had to say.
Also, you guys realize that we're still on YouTube?
Oh,
All right.
Oh, damn it.
no,
Sorry.
I wasn't
I just